Was it a trick of the tail? Was that hard to sort of like go back into the studios and work out now what are we going to do?
No, that was a great album.
Yeah?
It was the most enjoyable album to date at that point. I think there's something about, I mean, see, the genesis has always been kind of like all the members in the group have been writers. So you had 5 guys all trying to push ideas, you know, it's kind of like, oh, you know, trying to get your bit in. And suddenly there was space. We all had elbow room, you know, and we could all do what we wanted. And I think we just found it very easy. And I think the very first day, in fact, Steve wasn't even there that very first week because he was finishing off his solo album. And we wrote what later became Dance to Volcano, and it was just for us was a really sort of magical moment, you know.
And Los Endos happened.
And we had such confidence at that point. And it wasn't until halfway through the making of that album that the news about Peter broke out, and we suddenly had to face all these sort of things like, you know...
Obituaries, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was pretty much was writing us off, you know, and we had to kind of read these things. But it was... but we felt very confident that we had a good album, you know, so...
Well, it's sort of not only that, but it turned around a whole then era of Genesis as far as charts were concerned. Because then things started to really happen on the charts.
Yeah, well, again, I think it was irrelevant of any changes. I mean, this next album did much better than the one before, you know. I suppose, I mean, Trick of the Tail was a much more direct album than The Lamb. So, you know, what with that, and people were able to reassess the band, and people that didn't think they'd like it were going to listen to it to see what the new band was doing, and actually came away liking it.
So did you go back on the road at that stage after that album?
Yes, we hadn't totally decided that Phil was going to do the vocals live at that stage because, you know, we weren't sure about him. We knew he could sing now. Well, we didn't know, A, we thought we'd probably still want to play drums, and B, we weren't sure how you could sort of cope with having to put on a performance, you know, because Peter obviously had a very involved kind of act and things, and so... but what we found was, one big advantage we had was, we said before, the Lamb tour we'd done before had been a very difficult... The audience, I think, had enjoyed the fact that we tried, you know, but obviously we hadn't played the old favourites, so we were able to go on the next tour and play all the old favourites, which was great, so it was much easier for the audience. And because I think Phil came from within the band, they gave him a lot more time, you know.
I think people were willing it. I definitely got the feeling from an audience. I mean, I remember the first gig was in London, Ontario in Canada, and went on stage, and you felt the 4,000 or 5,000 people that were there. Because I guess we were selling out those kind of gigs by then, weren't we?
In Canada, certainly, yeah.
And they were willing it to be okay, you know.
Yeah.
And that kind of made me rise to the occasion a bit. And then after the first gig, I kind of felt I knew what I had to do. Until the first gig was over.
It was halfway through that first gig, because I was sitting there, obviously having played for years and just looking, you know, outside the stage, looking across and seeing Peter there, you know, and suddenly seeing him, and you know, when I first saw him, it looked all wrong, you know. It's like sort of, you know, going up without your underpants.
Yeah.
And but it was about halfway through that first gig, I suddenly realised it was going to make it. I thought, you know what, he's coping with it, you know, he's taking to it. And it was like, and he'd prepared some little stories to tell and things, you know, so in case he completely dried up and everything, and it sort of, and then you started to ad-lib a bit, and it sort of worked, you know.
I'm still not using the same jokes, mate. Yeah. But we had Bill Bruford playing drums as well. I mean,
well, he came in later though, didn't he?
He came in for the Trick of the Tail too.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah, because I wasn't playing drums and singing.
Right.
And one of the stipulations, if you like, that I sort of said, well, if I am going to go out front, I've got to find a drummer that I like. That, you know, because the worst thing for me to have been was to stand out front listening to something that I didn't like on the drums. You know, being a drummer really first and foremost, which at that stage I definitely was. So I'd been working with Bill Bruford in Brand X, and he said, I hear you're looking for a drummer. And we were friends anyway. And how about, I wouldn't mind having a go. And so I brought him, I didn't think to ask him, because he had already been in that direction with Yes. And he came down, he got on well with everybody. And he was great. It was great fun to have around, and he helped us a lot in the first.
I think it's quite an asset in America too, because he has a sort of, certainly in those days, probably still has had a sort of following of his own, you know. Yeah. I think also Americans just love shouting out the name. They'd all go "Woofar" like this, you know. Just all the time we were out there, you know, sort of in between songs, this would be the main cry you'd hear. So I think he attracted quite a lot of people along as well. So
yeah,
it wasn't a bad thing.
His involvement was definitely made it more of a musical band to the elite. Yeah. You know, there were sort of Bill's in the band. He's a good musician, and so it must be all right. And so a lot of people, or even though we were pretty good ourselves, you know, it was kind of it added an extra dimension to the band for that short while, because he was only with us for about a year, wasn't he?
Well, I mean, even with that album, I mean, American radio and Australian radio and places like that were picking up a lot of the songs then, and treating them, even though like they were just playing cuts off the album, as if they were treated as a single. Was it happening the same here?
It's still, well, the difference here, there was things like Capital Radio, actually, which is sort of open, which is a sort of the commercial stations that started up, and we got really good play on on one of the shows on that particular, the Nicky Horn show. And also Alan Freeman, who had a show on Radio 1, which played album tracks. That was also, I think, was that stage, was it? Must have been.
Yeah,
was playing us quite a bit. So you were starting to get some radio play. And it was interesting because it was a great time in American radio at that point, because they would just play every track off the album as a potential thing, whereas nowadays they've gone right back. It seems to be they'll only play singles, you know. They were playing every track, and you'd look at playlists and you'd see any track could be played, and that was great for us because our strength, I think, has always been our variety. We don't want all our eggs sort of tied up into this one single, you know, because that will say, well, every time I'll apologise for it. I'll say, well, that's okay, it's one side, but we do this as well. But if all your tracks are being played, then you know, you're hearing the lot. That's great.
Was it around about this time where you were actually taking a really active interest in the production side, you know?
Well, with Trick of the Tail was the first album that we got in someone new, didn't we? Dave Henschel was an old friend of mine. And I think we had some funny business with John Burns of the Lamb, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
And whilst at the time, of course, you're pleased with it. I mean, otherwise you go back and redo it. So we were pleased with the things the way they came out, but we just thought it would be nice to, you know, change direction production-wise as well. So Dave Henschel produced Trick of the Tail, and he stayed with us for about 3 or 4 or 5 albums up until Duke. I think Duke was the last one he did. So we were trying to just get better, you know, generally speaking, broadly speaking. We were just trying to get better at everything we did, you know, and our production was included in that, just trying to make the record sound a bit better and taking a bit more care of them.
We travelled the wide open road, the blinkered arcade, in search of another to share in his life. Nowhere, everyone looked so strange to him. They got no horns and they got no tail. They don't really know of our existence. Am I wrong to believe in the city of gold that lies in the distance? They cry and where they lay.
All right, Wind and Wuthering comes out, and by this stage Genesis are becoming have become virtually a major name, and there is a lot to live up to now. Was there any pressure on you as far as then?
We never really felt pressure. I mean, certainly not in those days, because there was no pressure on us to produce singles or anything, which I think was the most difficult pressure to respond to. I think Wind and Wuthering, some people found it, I think in a sense, it's almost our most difficult album in some ways, actually, Wind and Wuthering, along with The Lamb. It goes furthest down the romantic road, I suppose, of all the albums. I think in America, it was more difficult to take than Trick of the Tail, which is more straight up.
It was also a little bit with Steve, wasn't it, by this point? Steve was starting to sort of give the impression that maybe this wasn't quite what he wanted to do. Or not quite. I think he felt that he was writing a lot of music and bringing it into the band, and we never have worked on a 4-man band, 25% of the music each. You know, we never worked on those principles. It's always been whatever motivated us and whatever we liked. So if we liked all of Tony's stuff but none of Steve's, that's the way it was. That's, you know, whatever the best material was. And we didn't really, generally, we didn't use as much of Steve's material as we did Tony or Mike's. And I think this was frustrating him, especially as he had a taste of solo work.
Yeah.
So he knew that he could do an album on his own. And I think at that point we started to get a feeling that maybe he was going to move on.
then there were three. You were saying before, like when Peter left, it at least gave you elbow room for the songwriting. The three of you, did it give more elbow room? Was it a, sort of a new feeling that you
I
have
think
now?
so. I think so, yes. Although and then there were three, ended up being mainly using tracks written as sort of more individually, actually. There's a lot of tracks written by Mike and by myself,
Right.
and then we did about 2 or 3 tracks as a group. We sort of combined bits together. But I think it was sort of like, you did feel there was more room. I mean, it was less, I don't know, it was. And I mean, it's more apparent since, perhaps. That particular album, I don't know. I mean, it's not my favourite of our albums, actually. But after that, particularly when we've been working in a studio in the room and sort of playing, it's been 3 people is great in a way, actually, because you can kind of, you've got enough room to sort of, you know, to make, I mean, you don't, so what used to happen, and still, obviously, even with 3 you get it, but used to happen with, say, 4, was that 2 people would both be playing, both reckon they're playing something great, and they get louder and louder and louder and compete, you know, and you wouldn't hear either of them. Whereas with 3, it tends to be that if one of us is Mike or myself, will be kind of like backing the other person, so one person can dominate for a bit, so you get the idea can actually come through. Yeah, I think the thing was that with one that we did mention about and then there were 3 was it had the song Follow You, Follow Me on it, which
Right.
Over in England was our first
Well, which
top,
was a major hit.
yes, it was it was a hit, a top 5 hit,
Yeah.
you know, in England, and it also, even in America, it got in the top 30, you know, and that was the first time we'd ever had any kind of single success.
And that you say you didn't like that album particularly.
It's a funny album, and I heard it the other day, I quite liked it. I'm not my favourite of albums, no, I mean, I must be honest, I like all our music.
Right.
I'm a fan, no. But and then there were 3, perhaps just because it was a little more disjointed. There are moments on it I don't like so much. But I like, you know, I mean, I like certain of the songs. Follow You, Follow Me is not my favourite song, but I think it's a good single. We felt it was a single when we were writing it. We thought we'd actually finally cracked it, maybe. I don't know, there was nothing different about the way we wrote it. We were just improvising. We were trying this thing as a very heavy riff, and then suddenly we said, well, let's try it a bit quieter and see what happens. And it just sort of took off, and it sounded great. But I think what the difference it made to radio, both here and in America, was that people started to take our singles seriously.
So safe.